The wind didn't howl. It whispered, a thin, cold sound that slithered through the gaps in the old chapel's stonework. It was the only mourner besides me that seemed to have shown up for my husband. I stood alone, a solitary figure in black, my hand resting on the polished mahogany of Robert's casket. The wood was smooth and cold, a stark contrast to the warm, calloused hand I had held for 45 years. The funeral director, a young man named Mr. Albright, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes darting between me and the vast expanse of empty pews. The scent of too many lilies, bought in a desperate attempt to fill the void, was suffocating. Mrs. Holloway? Would you like us to wait a few more minutes? He finally asked, his voice hushed with a pity I found unbearable. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Begin. Robert was a man of punctuality. He'd hate a delay, even for this. Robert. My Robert. He took his heart medication at 8 a.m. sharp, read the newspaper from front to back every morning, and always without fail kissed me goodbye before he walked out the door. A man of order, of quiet dignity, now being laid to rest in a silence so profound it felt like a condemnation. I took my seat in the front row. 5 empty chairs surrounded me. 5 voids where our children and grandchildren should have been. The pastor's words were a bland recitation, devoid of the passion and humor that had defined the man in the box. I couldn't focus on the scripture. All I could think was Robert would have hated this fuss. And then he would have looked around, his brow furrowed, and asked, Edith, where are the kids? Where were they? A text had blinked onto my phone that morning from our son, David. Sorry, Mom. A major client presentation came up. Can't get away. No further explanation. No phone call. I could picture him in his glass-walled office, or more likely on a golf course, the sun glinting off his Rolex, mentally filing his father's death under inconvenient personal affairs. Our daughter, Marianne, hadn't even granted me that much. 2 days ago, a voicemail, her voice breezy and bright. Mom, I'm swamped. The charity gala is tonight and I'm chairing the committee. You know how it is. Give Dad my love. I'll pop by next week. Next week. As if death was a social call that could be rescheduled. The service ended. I walked alone behind the casket, my sensible black heels sinking into the soft earth of the cemetery. There was no procession. Just me, the pallbearers, and a lone groundskeeper leaning on his shovel in the distance, a silent witness to our family's shame. The coffin was lowered. The final prayer was whispered. A handful of dust met polished wood. I stood there long after the others had retreated, leaving me alone with the gaping hole in the ground. The wind tugged at the hem of my coat, a lonely caress. The temporary plaque read, Robert Holloway. Beloved husband, father. The word father felt like a lie carved in metal. Back in the house we had shared for 40 years, the silence was a physical presence. It roared. His worn leather armchair sat empty. His reading glasses were still folded on the side table, next to a half-finished crossword. The remote control was perfectly aligned with the edge of the coffee table, just as he'd left it. I walked to the kitchen, bypassing the tea. I opened the cabinet where we kept the good liquor for guests and poured 2 fingers of amber whiskey into a crystal tumbler. Robert's drink. I didn't sip it for comfort, but for clarity. Then, driven by a masochistic impulse I didn't understand, I took out my phone. I rarely scrolled through social media, but a cold intuition guided my fingers. Marianne's profile was public. Of course. There she was, posted just an hour ago. A picture of her and 3 friends, their faces flushed, holding flutes of champagne. The caption, Gala success. So proud of my team. Hashtag making a difference, hashtag blessed. I swiped. David had posted, too. A photo of a gleaming skyscraper captioned, Close the Henderson deal. Big things on the horizon. Hard work pays off. I stared at the screen until the bright, smiling faces blurred into pixels of betrayal. I turned the phone off, the screen going black, reflecting my own grief-stricken face back at me. My gaze drifted to the wall, to a framed photograph of Robert and me on our 40th anniversary, standing in front of the rose garden he had tenderly cultivated for decades. The roses had been a vibrant, defiant red. Now they were bare, skeletal twigs scratching at the autumn sky. A cold, hard certainty settled in my chest, crystallizing the amorphous pain into a sharp, actionable point. Tomorrow, I thought, finishing the whiskey, its fire a catalyst for my resolve. Tomorrow I will call the lawyer. The children had written their own ending to this family story. Now I would write the final chapter of Robert's will. And mine. The lawyer's office was a sanctuary of mahogany and leather, smelling of lemon polish and old money. Lawrence Croft had been our family attorney for 30 years. He'd handled Robert's will, the trust for the children's education, the deed to the lake house. He was a man who valued precision over platitudes. He rose as I entered, his expression a careful blend of professionalism and personal concern. "Edith," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his monumental desk. "I was sorry to hear about Robert. A great man." "Thank you, Lawrence," I said, sitting straight-backed, my purse placed neatly on my lap. "But I'm not here to grieve. I'm here to revise my will." He picked up a pen. "Of course. What changes would you like to make?" "I want David and Marianne removed. Entirely." The pen stilled. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Edith," he began, his tone cautious, "that is a significant decision. Are you certain?" "I buried my husband yesterday," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the tremor I felt inside. "Our children did not come. Not a call, not a flower. They were busy." I met his gaze squarely. "They do not deserve a dime of what Robert and I built." Lawrence held my stare for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Then we shall draft a full amendment. Remove them from every provision? The accounts, the house, the lake property. Everything." "Understood." He made a note on a yellow legal pad. "And do you wish to redirect the assets?" I thought of Liam, Marianne's boy, the only one who ever saw me as more than a utility. The grandson who had shoveled my driveway last winter without being asked, who brought me books from the library and actually discussed them with me, who once told me, "Grandma, your stories are better than anything on TV." "Yes," I said, a flicker of warmth cutting through the ice in my veins. "I want to set up a trust for Liam. The house, the cabin, the remainder of the estate. I want it structured so his parents cannot touch it." "That can be arranged," Lawrence said. "We'll create an irrevocable trust. He won't have full access until he's 30, barring educational or medical needs. Does that suit you?" "It sounds perfect." For the next hour, we dismantled the financial future I had once imagined for my children. With each signature, each initialed clause, I felt not a pang of guilt, but a layer of weight being stripped from my shoulders. When you have stood at the precipice of your life partner's grave and found yourself utterly alone, the power of a legal document feels trivial. It was merely the administrative cleanup of an emotional truth that had already been settled. As I stood to leave, Lawrence spoke again. "Edith, may I say, this kind of clarity is rare. Most people cling to the hope of reconciliation, even in the face of profound disrespect." "I clung to hope for 40 years, Lawrence," I replied, pulling on my gloves. "It buried me long before it buried Robert." I walked out of his office into the weak autumn sunlight, the signed documents tucked securely in my bag. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was simply irrevocably done. That evening I didn't eat leftovers. I cooked a proper meal, set the table for one, and ate by candlelight. The silence was no longer an accusation. It was my companion. After dinner, I went to the filing cabinet in Robert's study. I pulled out 2 thick folders, one labeled David Education and Ventures, the other Marianne Home and Family. I carried them to the kitchen table and began to read. It was a ledger of a life lived in service to my children. A $20,000 check for David's can't-fail tech startup that evaporated in 6 months. A $15,000 transfer for Marianne's dream wedding to a man she divorced 2 years later. Payments for braces for private school for Liam, For a new roof after a storm, for car repairs, for credit card debt. Line after line, a chronicle of their emergencies and my quiet rescues. Not once had they refused my help, but they had refused to say goodbye to their father. I closed the folders. The love I had given, the sacrifices I had made, had not built a family. They had built a dependency. And when the source of that dependency was no longer useful, it was discarded. I rose and walked to the hall closet, pulling out a small box. Inside were a few of Liam's childhood drawings and a letter he'd written me when he was 10. Dear Grandma, thank you for the pancakes. You are the best. When I grow up, I will take care of you. I held that faded piece of notebook paper. It was worth more than every check I had ever written. Fairness, I realized, wasn't about dividing things equally. It was about giving your legacy to the one who valued your heart, not your wallet. The call came 3 days later. Grandma. Liam's voice was hesitant, soft with static. It's me. Liam, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. Hello, darling. I heard about Grandpa. Mom just told me last night. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I closed my eyes, allowing the genuine pain in his voice to wash over me. The service was yesterday, Liam. I know, she said. She said it was small. That it was handled. He took a shaky breath. I should have called you. I didn't know it was so soon. The pieces clicked into place. Marianne hadn't just withheld the information. She had sanitized it, making it sound like a minor managed event. He came to the house an hour later, looking older than his 19 years, his face etched with a grief that was palpably real. He hugged me, a full, unreserved embrace that spoke volumes. I'm so sorry, Grandma, he whispered into my shoulder. We sat in the living room. I didn't offer him platitudes. I simply let him be with his sorrow. After a long silence, he looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed. Did she really not come? She had a gala to chair, I said, my tone neutral. He flinched as if I'd struck him. She told me they were both swamped with work. That it was better this way. Their version of better and mine are very different, I replied. He shook his head, a fresh wave of anger and shame crossing his features. I want to do something. For you. For him. Anything. You are, I said softly. You're here. I made a decision then. I went to the desk and retrieved the trust papers Lawrence had messengered over. I handed the folder to him. He opened it, his brow furrowing in confusion as he read. His eyes widened. Grandma, what is this? This is everything. It's my will, Liam. The house, the cabin, the savings. It's all for you. He stared at me, utterly bewildered. Why? Why me and not Mom or David? Because you're the only one who came back without being asked, I said simply. Because you see me, not what I can do for you. Tears welled in his eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just remember what real love looks like. It shows up. Marianne arrived the next morning like a thunderstorm. Her car screeched to a halt in the driveway. She didn't knock. Mother, she declared, striding into the kitchen, her designer handbag a weapon of status. I've been calling you for days. I've been busy, I said, not looking up from the newspaper. Busy with what? She scoffed. I finally met her gaze. With my life. It's a novel concept, I know. Her composure cracked for a second. Liam told me about your little stunt. Changing your will. Is this some kind of pathetic cry for attention? No, Marianne. It's a statement of fact. You didn't come to your father's funeral. You didn't call. You didn't even ask how I was. You posted pictures of a party. I had an obligation, she snapped. So did I. My voice for the first time sharpened. My obligation was to the man I loved for 45 years. And I fulfilled it. Alone. She stared at me, her mouth a tight line. So you're cutting us out. Just like that. Not just like that, I corrected her, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. It was a lifetime in the making. I spent decades giving and you spent decades taking. I sat by your father's grave and waited for my children. They never came. That's not just like that. That's the final sentence of a very long story. You're punishing us. No, I am rectifying a profound imbalance. I am giving everything to the one person in this family who understands that love is a verb. She snatched her bag from the counter. Well, she said, her voice dripping with venom, I hope this makes you feel powerful. It doesn't make me feel powerful, Marianne, I said, turning back to my paper. It makes me feel free. David's visit was colder, more corporate. He came with his wife, Chloe, a woman whose smile never reached her eyes. They sat in the living room like they were at a business meeting. Mother, David began, his tone carefully modulated. We need to talk about this rash decision. Liam is a child. He can't manage an estate. He's 19. And he's more of an adult than the two of you combined, I replied. Be reasonable, Chloe interjected, her voice smooth as silk. This could get messy. Legally. I smiled a thin, cold smile. It won't. My lawyer is excellent. And I have nothing but time. They left shortly after, their offers of reason rejected. The house felt cleaner after they were gone. I had drawn a line in the sand, and the tide of their entitlement could no longer cross it. The final paperwork was filed. The trust was active and ironclad. Liam's name was now on the deeds, the accounts, the future. The knowledge was a quiet hum of satisfaction, a closed loop. I began to live for myself. I took walks without a destination. I dug out my old sewing machine and made new, brightly colored curtains that didn't match a thing. I danced awkwardly and alone in the living room to scratchy old records. Liam started coming over regularly. We didn't talk about the inheritance much. Instead, we talked about the house. He pointed out the rotting porch step, the loose gutter, the overgrown flower beds. Grandma, he said one afternoon, I was thinking, maybe we could fix up the lake cabin. Not to sell it, to use it. Maybe even let other families who need a break use it sometimes. I looked at him, at the earnest light in his eyes, and I felt it, a fragile, beautiful bud of hope. I think your grandfather would have loved that, I said. We started with the porch. He sanded and I stained. We worked in a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who don't need to fill the air with noise to feel connected. One evening, as we sat on the newly repaired steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Liam turned to me. Thank you, Grandma, he said. Not for the money. For believing in me. I always have, Liam, I replied. I just finally put my money where my heart is. He smiled, and it was Robert's smile, warm and true. The children's silence stretched on. There were no more angry visits, no pleading calls. They had retreated into their own narratives, where I was undoubtedly the villain. I found I didn't care. Let them have their version. I had my truth, my peace, and my grandson. The first snow of winter began to fall, a gentle blanket of white covering the dormant garden. I stood at the window, a cup of tea in my hand, and watched Liam string up lights on the porch rail. He was building something, not just with wood and nails but with love and intention. Robert's legacy wouldn't be a bank account divided between ungrateful heirs. It would be a restored porch, a welcoming cabin, a young man with a moral compass, and a wife who finally learned that her own company was enough. The empty chairs at the funeral had been a tragedy, but the full heart I carried now was a victory. I had not just rewritten a will, I had reclaimed my story, and the final chapter I knew was going to be mine to write. The first Christmas after Robert's death approached like a specter. For weeks, the season's cheerful music in grocery stores felt like a personal affront, and the twinkling lights on neighbors' houses seemed to highlight the darkness of my own. Liam had asked if I wanted to put up a tree, but the thought of unpacking decades of ornaments, each one a tiny, sharp memory, felt unbearable. I think we'll let the outside lights be enough this year, I told him, and he'd simply nodded, understanding. It was a bitter Tuesday in mid-December when the doorbell rang, its chime startling in the afternoon quiet. Through the peephole I saw not Liam, nor a deliverman, but my daughter-in-law Chloe. She stood alone on the porch, clutching a large, festively wrapped basket, her face pinched against the cold. I considered not answering. The peace I had cultivated felt fragile, and Chloe was a walking disturbance. But curiosity and a stubborn refusal to hide in my own home won out. I opened the door. "Chloe." "Edith." She offered a tight smile. I was in the neighborhood. We both knew she lived 40 minutes away. I stepped aside wordlessly, and she swept in, her eyes performing a rapid inventory of the living room, noting the absence of holiday decor, the simple, clean lines of the space now that I'd removed the clutter of a lifetime. "I brought you a little something," she said, placing the basket on the coffee table. It was filled with expensive, useless things. Gourmet cocoa mix, a cashmere throw, a scented candle. Gifts that said obligation, not affection. "Thank you," I said, not moving to open it. An awkward silence descended. She finally broke it, perching on the edge of an armchair. "David sends his regards. He's terribly busy with the year-end close." "I'm sure." "Edith." She leaned forward, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone I distrusted immediately. "I'm going to be frank. This situation with the will, it's causing a rift. A deep one. David is devastated. Disowned. He felt too busy to attend his father's funeral," I replied, my voice flat. "One might argue he disowned himself." She flinched but pressed on. "He's your son. People make mistakes. They get caught up in their lives. Must the punishment be so permanent? So total?" "It's not a punishment, Chloe. It's a consequence. And it's not up for discussion." Her mask of pleasantry finally slipped. "It's about Liam, isn't it? You've always favored him. You're turning him against his own parents." A cold anger, the last embers of a dying fire, stirred within me. "I am doing no such thing. Liam is a kind, decent young man who makes his own choices. His parents and you are perfectly capable of alienating him without my help." She stood up abruptly, her composure shattered. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I said, rising to my full height, meeting her glare for glare. "The family was already broken. I am merely sweeping up the pieces and deciding which ones are worth keeping. That basket," I gestured to her ostentatious gift, "you can take it with you. Give it to one of your clients. I have no use for it." The color drained from her face. Without another word, she snatched the basket from the table and strode to the door. She paused on the threshold, turning back for a final parting shot. "You're a cold woman, Edith Holloway. I hope this lonely victory keeps you warm at night." Then she was gone, the slam of the door echoing in the quiet house. I stood there for a long moment, waiting for the tremor of anger, the ache of regret. But none came. Instead, there was only a profound sense of finality. The last bridge to that part of my life had not just been burned, it had been dismantled brick by brick. Liam arrived on Christmas Eve bearing a small live potted spruce tree, its branches smelling sharply of pine and earth. "It's not a big production," he said, his breath misting in the cold air. "We can plant it in the yard after." I thought, the house could use a little green. My eyes stung. It was the perfect gesture, life, not nostalgia. We decorated it with a single string of white lights and a few simple, handmade paper stars we crafted together at the kitchen table, the radio playing soft carols in the background. It was the most peaceful Christmas Eve I could remember. The next morning we exchanged simple gifts. I gave him a set of high-quality vintage tools that had belonged to Robert, the ones David had never had any interest in. Liam's face lit with a reverence that was its own reward. He gave me a leather-bound journal and a beautiful fountain pen. "For your stories," he said quietly, "you should write them down." We were sitting by the fire sipping tea when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marianne. A single image, a perfectly staged photo of her, David, and their families around a towering, glittering tree, all wearing matching pajamas. The caption, Merry Christmas from our family to yours. So blessed. The irony was so thick it was almost laughable. The picture-perfect family, broadcast to the world, while their mother sat contentedly with their son, whom they had effectively orphaned through their own neglect. I showed the phone to Liam. He sighed, a world-weary sound from someone so young. They live in a showroom, he said. Everything is for display. He looked at me. Are you okay? I looked from the hollow perfection on the screen to the genuine, quiet companionship in my living room. The small living tree, the smell of wood smoke, the simple unwrapped gift of his presence. For the first time in a long time, I said and meant it, I am perfectly okay. Later, as he was preparing to leave to see friends, he hesitated at the door. Grandma, I've been thinking about the lake cabin. I found an architect online who specializes in sustainable renovations. I was thinking, maybe we could make it wheelchair accessible. Add a ramp. Widen the doors. So it could be used by veterans groups or something. The idea blossomed in my mind, beautiful and purposeful. It was so much more than I had ever envisioned. Robert, who had served in his youth, would have been thrilled. That, I said, my voice thick with emotion, is a magnificent idea. After he left, the silence returned, but it was no longer the roaring silence of abandonment. It was a fertile quiet, filled with the promise of the future. I picked up the journal Liam had given me and opened it to the first page. I uncapped the fountain pen, the nib gleaming in the firelight, and began to write. Chapter 1. The air in the old chapel was thin and cold. Winter tightened its grip, but a new energy had taken root in me. Liam's idea for the cabin had ignited a sense of purpose that went beyond personal healing. We met with Lawrence Croft again, this time to discuss not the dissolution of an estate, but the creation of something new. We want to establish a foundation, I told him, Liam sitting proudly beside me. The Robert Holloway Legacy Foundation. Its initial purpose will be to fund the renovation of the lake property into an accessible retreat, with the long-term goal of providing short-term stays for caregivers and families in need of respite. Lawrence listened, a slow smile spreading across his face. Now that, he said, is a legacy. Robert would be proud. The legal work began. We drew up plans, created a board of directors, comprised of myself, Liam, Lawrence, and a trusted financial advisor. We decided that once the cabin was operational, Liam would serve as its part-time manager, a role that would provide him with both income and invaluable experience. One afternoon, we drove out to the lake cabin. It was a 2-hour journey through snow-dusted hills, the landscape stark and beautiful. The cabin itself was a sturdy, A-frame structure that Robert had built with friends in the 70s. It was cold and musty, filled with old fishing gear and faded furniture, but it was solid, full of potential. Liam walked through it with a contractor's eye, tapping walls, measuring door frames, his excitement palpable. We can open up this wall here for a bigger window, he said, sketching in a notepad. The view of the lake is the best feature. Watching him, I saw not a boy inheriting a windfall, but a man discovering his vocation. He was building his own future, and in doing so, he was honoring the past in the most meaningful way possible. The news of the foundation, however, did not stay quiet for long. David called, his voice a controlled fury barely contained by the phone line. A foundation? Mother, have you lost your mind? You're giving away family assets to strangers. The family showed no interest in these assets when it mattered, I replied calmly. And it's not giving away. It's repurposing, creating something of lasting value. This is Liam's influence, isn't it? He's filled your head with this philanthropic nonsense. On the contrary, I said, he's helped me see the potential for genuine good, something you might consider. He hung up on me. It was the first time he had ever done so. The finality of the dial tone was a small, sharp pain, but it passed quickly. I was building a new family, one made not of blood, but of shared values and purpose. It was Lawrence who called me with the news in early February. His tone was dry, factual. Edith, I thought you should know. David's firm, There's talk. A major deal fell through. The one he posted about on LinkedIn last fall. It seems it wasn't as closed as he led everyone to believe. There are rumors of significant financial pressure. I felt a pang not of schadenfreude, but of a deep, weary sadness. David had always been about the appearance of success. The right car, the right house, the right clubs. He had built his life on a foundation of sand and credit, and now the tide was coming in. A week later, Marianne showed up unannounced again. This time there was no fury, no performative grief. She looked tired, her expensive haircut unable to mask the shadows under her eyes. She didn't try to come in, just stood on the porch, shivering in her thin coat. "Mother," she said, her voice small, "I need to ask you. Is the offer? Is it truly final?" I knew what she was asking. The financial safety net she had taken for granted her entire life was gone, and the ground beneath her was growing unstable. "Yes, Marianne," I said, my voice softer than I had intended. "It is." She nodded, a single tear tracing a path through her perfectly applied makeup. "David's in trouble. Real trouble. And Charles and we're not." She trailed off, unable to finish the admission that her picture-perfect marriage, like her brother's finances, was perhaps not what it seemed. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was sorry for the people they had become, for the hollowness at the core of their glittering lives. "Is there nothing?" she whispered, a desperate child looking out from a woman's eyes. "There is advice," I said. "Sell the house you can't afford. Get a job you don't just do for show. Learn to live within your means. And for God's sake, Marianne, talk to your son. He's the only real thing you have left." She looked at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language, then turned and walked back to her car, her shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. It was not the dramatic exit of before. It was a defeat. I didn't feel victorious. I felt a profound and aching pity. They had been given every advantage, every ounce of love and support, and they had traded it all for a gilded cage. And now the door was locked and I held the key, but I would not use it to let them back into the prison of my generosity. Spring arrived, tentative and muddy. With it came the contractors at the lake cabin. The sound of hammers and saws replaced the winter silence, a symphony of renewal. Liam was there almost every day, his hands dirty, his mind buzzing with plans and solutions. I drove out once a week to see the progress. The old dark interior was being opened up, filled with light. The new ramp was taking shape, a graceful curve leading to the front door. It was no longer just Robert's old fishing cabin. It was becoming a place of healing, a testament to a different kind of strength. One such afternoon, as Liam and I were reviewing paint samples on the new porch, an old battered sedan pulled up the gravel drive. A woman got out, perhaps in her late 40s, with a kind, weary face. It was Sarah, the groundskeeper's daughter from the cemetery. We had exchanged a few words over the months during my visits to Robert's grave. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, approaching hesitantly, "I heard about what you're doing out here. My father mentioned it. I work with a local group that supports families of disabled veterans. I was wondering if I could maybe take a look." "Of course," I said, and introduced her to Liam. As he showed her the plans, her eyes welled with tears. "This is incredible," she whispered. "My brother. He was injured overseas. Getting him out of the house for a weekend is so difficult. A place like this, it would mean the world." Watching Liam explain the accessibility features with passion and knowledge, and seeing the hope on Sarah's face, I felt a certainty settle deep in my soul. This was right. This was the answer. The money wasn't just being preserved. It was being put to work, creating ripples of good that would extend far beyond our fractured family. That night I wrote in my journal, "We are not defined by what we are given, but by what we build with it." Robert built a family. I failed to protect it. But now with Liam, we are building a sanctuary. Perhaps that is a different kind of family, one that chooses its members not by blood, but by heart. The first guests were scheduled to arrive at the newly renamed Holloway Haven in early summer. The local paper had run a small feature on it, and the response from the community had been quietly supportive. I was in the garden, the one Robert had loved so much, pruning the rose bushes that were finally showing signs of new life. The air was warm, carrying the scent of damp earth and blossoms. Liam's car pulled up. He didn't come alone. Getting out of the passenger side was Marianne. My hand stilled on the shears. She looked different. She was wearing simple jeans and a t-shirt, her face free of makeup, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked real. She walked over slowly, stopping a few feet from me, her hands shoved in her pockets. "Hi, Mom." "Marianne." Liam hung back, giving us space. I've been seeing a therapist," she began, her voice unsteady. "After everything. She's been helping me see some things. About me. About Dad. About you." She took a deep breath. "I was awful to you. I was a terrible daughter. I was so obsessed with the life I thought I was supposed to have that I forgot about the one I did have. I said nothing, just waited. I'm selling the house. Charles and I are separating. It's amicable. We were just playing a part." She looked at the rose bushes, at the house, anywhere but at me. "Liam has been telling me about the cabin. What you're doing. It's good. Dad would have loved it." "Yes," I said softly. "He would have." She finally met my gaze, her eyes swimming with tears. "I don't expect anything from you, Mom. Not money, not forgiveness. I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I threw away. And I'm sorry. I am so sorry." The words hung in the air between us, fragile and true. They weren't a demand. They were a gift. I looked past her at Liam, who gave me a small, hopeful nod. He had built this bridge, not with demands, but with quiet persistence and the unwavering belief that people could change. The anger and the hurt, which had once been a granite wall inside me, had eroded over the months, worn down by peace and purpose. What was left was not forgetfulness, but a weary acceptance. "I'm glad you're finding your way, Marianne," I said. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't a reunion. It was simply an acknowledgement. A seed, perhaps, from which something new and different might one day grow. She nodded, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. Can I come by sometimes? Just to talk." "You can," I said. She didn't try to hug me. She just turned and walked back to Liam's car, looking lighter than she had in years. Liam came over and put his arm around my shoulders. We stood together in the garden Robert had planted, watching Marianne drive away. "It's a start," Liam said quietly. I looked at the vibrant new growth on the rose bushes, at the strong young man beside me, and at the future we were building from the ashes of the past. "Yes," I said, feeling the warm sun on my face. "It is." The story wasn't about vengeance anymore, or even justice. It was about redemption, not theirs but mine. I had reclaimed my life, my voice, and my legacy. And in doing so, I had somehow, against all odds, made room for a fragile, cautious peace. The circle wasn't closed, but it was no longer broken. It was simply open, waiting to see what would come next.